Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. And the underground man is like an original incel because he takes so much pride in his suffering.
To 10% of women in America aged 18 to 24 are on OnlyFans.
The incel thing, ooh, it's really at home in analytic philosophy. It appeals to that combative instinct in a young man's intellect, and it makes him feel like he's on a side.
The incels take it as a badge of honor.
Most people who are in religious studies departments are some sort of atheist.
I think there's a reason that the Buddha had to abandon his family, that Jesus didn't have a family to begin with. The great entrepreneurs like Elon and Steve Jobs have terrible private lives, and a lot of the great philosophers, most of them aren't married.
Bronze Age pervert or other incel type voices, they're wrong about that because they have such a small understanding of Nietzsche. Nietzsche always comes across a little bit as
Insecure. Right?
He's still going through a puberty, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He's still showing the tough guyish.
Something terrible has happened in modern dating. 5 to 10% of young American women are on OnlyFans. Birth rates have plummeted below subsistence in developed nations, and an unbelievable number of young men identify as incels, men who proudly advertise that they can't get any girls. My guest today is Notre Dame's David O'Connor. He's going to diagnose what has gone wrong, show us how incels and OnlyFans are two sides of the same coin, and what you can do today to secure a happy love life. In this interview, Professor O'Connor will rescue classical resources from the Platonic and Catholic traditions to help you survive modern dating. What are young men doing wrong in dating today?
A lot of young men are actually fearful about letting women know that they're attracted to them. And it's as if they've lost confidence in their own erotic agency somehow. It's important that they just are bold enough to let a woman see that they're interested in her as a woman. I've told students over and over again, I do not believe in this notion that, well, we should be friends first. I think that's completely wrong. I don't think that friendship and an erotic connection are somehow continuous things. I think they're both valuable things, but I think they're quite different things. And I think that one of the things that's wrong, and it can't be wrong just with men, it must be wrong with couples. That'd be the first thing I want to emphasize. I think that young men and women of that age when their erotic sensitivity and therefore their erotic power is at its greatest, I think that seeing themselves as couples rather than seeing themselves as just men interested in women and women interested in men, but really seeing themselves as couples, I think that's very diminished in contemporary, at least the kind of contemporary elite culture that the young people I'm around the most are a part of. So that's one of the first things I would tell a young man, that have confidence in your own erotic agency, which makes you want to be part of a couple. It's not that somehow you're on this individual search for something and that thing happens to be a woman. It's that you are looking for somebody else who also feels a certain sense of incompleteness about themselves, and somebody who wants to live as a couple. And I've talked to lots of young women, and I'm saying young, 22-year-olds are not young. From the point of view of falling in love and using their erotic potency to create a couple, they're not young. They're not too young.
Right.
How old is still young? Is 30 young? It's not. So that to me, that's part of where the energy is to let people know you're not too young. That is a fear, that they're too young. No, you're not too young. You're ready. You can feel the energy in you for this. And use that energy. You're not going to have that in the same way forever.
Right.
When you've been teaching for a long time, people often ask you, are your students different? And for a long, long time, I always said, nah, they're not really that much different. when I saw them become different was in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. Notre Dame families are mostly very secure, very well off. But somehow that financial downturn in 2009, it embedded an anxiety about the future that my students never really had. And now the college students who are coming to us, having caught by osmosis the anxieties of their parents about their kids' futures. Now, this was completely unreal. Notre Dame families were richer than ever, and the children's financial prospects were better than ever. But that isn't what's at the heart of agency, is it? It's your self-conception. And they were much more fearful about that. So that anxiety gets layered on top of this fearful erotic agency, the notion that there's something not quite sophisticated or elite about being a young man who, when he meets an attractive woman, thinks of her as, she might be my wife.
Right.
Now, I don't say that's the thing you say on the first date.
Right.
But
even that mentality is,
yes,
right.
Yes, that's a big thing in a human life, that's the way attraction presents itself to you. That you're finding a woman attractive or a woman finding a young man attractive, that presents itself to you as tapping into something very deep in your own powers. That power to become that kind of a couple.
There's an even more extreme version of men losing their erotic agency that has culminated into the incel movement. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
The involuntary celibates. And
yeah, I'd rather not be aware of it, but you can't really avoid it.
It's a huge, it truly is a movement.
And if you're around intellectual, high motive young men, you are going to run into language you can tell is coming out of some of this.
Right. And so, of course, there's been sexually frustrated men throughout history.
Yeah.
I think what makes this movement unique is three things. Number one is, whereas before, some of them, it was embarrassing, right, to not be able to win over a woman.
Yeah.
The incels take it as a badge, at the very least, and sometimes a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Number two is that, whereas before, they might attribute their lack of success to individual issues, but now it's taken a political and conspiratorial
Very
bent.
much.
That what they call the Chads, the handsome men, and the Stacys, the beautiful women, are in some sense conspiring.
Yeah.
The dating apps are sort of making markets too liquid.
Yes.
That there's a active conspiracy, like almost like 9/11. And the third one is the very fact that this is a movement to begin with. That there's a huge swath of American and I think maybe even global young men are involved in this circumstance. So what do you make of that? And do you see that as the further escalation of this loss of erotic power?
Yeah, the incel thing, look, I am not a native inhabitant of the online world. I only get it from talking to young men. Or reading Bronze Age Pervert.
Yeah, right.
Finding out that young men actually do talk about living in the longhouse, right? Which means there's something a little comic about it to me.
Oh yeah, for sure, yes.
But I think it deserves to be taken seriously because it hardens some young men in their sense that the war between the sexes is a real war.
Yeah, right.
And that's a terrible place to live, of course. That's an awful place to live. Now, young women have their own forms of this, but the incel thing, that's focused on men.
Right.
And it attracts a lot of very intelligent young men.
Oh, yes,
right?
Of course.
So when I talk to young men who've been influenced by these things, I emphasize to them that when you're still intellectually young, one of the things you're very attracted to is being smart. And that's quite a corrupting motive sometimes. You have to help people get beyond the show-offiness of that. I think in the incel thing, there's a lot of that young man show-offiness, that being a tough guy thing.
Right.
I think that is in there. Now, anybody who's worked with professional philosophers knows that's a part just of academic philosophy, the tough guy thing, the make these hard arguments back and forth thing, often with very little attempt to enrich them with a bit more human experience. I find the incel thing, it's really at home in analytic philosophy in a funny way.
Really? Interesting.
Yes, because it appeals to that combative instinct in a young man's intellect, and it makes him feel like he's on a side.
Right, I see.
I feel that. So I don't want to respond to it simply as a problem about the structure of erotic desire and of a lack of confidence in erotic agency. I think that's in there. But I think it's also important that it's part of being young men that they get attracted to extremist intellectual views that allow them to make arguments.
Right.
I think incels aren't that different from the kind of guys who, when I was in college, it wasn't incels, it was people who read Ayn Rand.
Right, yeah, or Nietzsche or something
Yes.
like that, right?
Yes.
Like they love extremist views that give them the power, give them the secret key to unlock everything.
I see it all, that kind of thing.
And that's so interesting because the incels started off as a very philosophical, anthropological movement analyzing data science trends among dating apps and say, look, this is where the conspiracy comes from. The top 1% of males get all the females. And so you're right, it's this highly intellectual movement
very much
that gives a sense of extreme political power. What I find super interesting about it is that the incels are squarely on the political right. They're they hate the woke, they hate the LGBTQ, they hate the feminist movements. But it's very interesting that they take on what I see to be a lot of the left's kind of intuitions.
They do.
In that they give a systematic analysis of the problem. Like, if you're not 6'2" and white and good looking, it's over for you. And you should just go to Switzerland and get your face plastic surgery and changed. Which of course is lacks a lot of individual agency because it's giving a system level argument.
Yeah.
But also the fact that some of them at least take a lot of pride in their victimhood.
They sure do.
It's very much like the woke and the DEI, and so there's a very interesting mirror between these two rival political factions that hate each other. Yeah.
Yes, I'm afraid so. I mean, I just recently I've been reading Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, and the underground man is like an original incel because he takes so much pride in his suffering. And he realizes my suffering is sort of self-inflicted, but he still has pride that he can inflict suffering on himself, which is a kind of Nietzschean point.
Right. The ascetic ideal, right?
Yes,
right.
Yes. So there is some of that in there. So I don't want to go too far and simply de-eroticize what's attractive about the incel discourse. But I do also want to insist that it's not only about people's erotic lives. It's about a certain sense of identity, of you being in kind of the avant-garde of an intellectual elite. And that's why right and left come together. That temptation to be part of that avant-garde thing, that can be right or left. It doesn't code politically very clearly.
It's the marginalized that seek
very
these.
Much.
And that's such an interesting point about why they would take it as a badge of honor that they can attract women, because it's a very weird thing to take pride in. But it's very much the Nietzschean aesthetic ideal that, at least I can make this statement, or at least,
Yes.
But is there anything to be said about the erotic or the de-eroticized component?
I think so. I mean, they are. There is no doubt that what I call marriage culture is very much diminished from what it used to be. It used to be that both young men and young women, by the time they were 20 or so, they thought of themselves as potential spouses, and not just potential, spouses within the next few years. Yes, imminent. Very much. And that I have found has disappeared almost entirely. There's still a small subculture at a Catholic place like Notre Dame. I've also known a lot of Mormons where that's still a part of their culture, but it has a specific religious cast. That didn't used to be a religion thing.
Right.
To be marriage oriented was not a religious thing. It was just a human thing. That, at least in elite culture, is greatly diminished. And all you have to do is look at marriage rates. So what the incels are seeing in this big picture is a truth. But it's a truth that's inside them as much as it is inside some scary bunch of Amazon women out there.
Right.
So they may think they're all living in the longhouse, the house that the moms run. But they're defining themselves that way too.
Right.
And a lot of them have never actually asked a woman on a date
Right.
that was recognizable as a date.
Right. Right.
So one of the things I find when you talk to young women is they're often very confused by young men who are so prissy about asking them out as if they're attracted to them that they're not quite sure. Like I think he asked me on a date, but I'm not sure. He said it was just coffee. So it was like he asked me on a date at the same time. He said, but it's not really a date.
Right.
Right. So I think some young men their confusion is that they've been told, or what they've heard is that to respect a woman is not to think of her as a potential erotic partner. But of course they think of her as an erotic partner. She's attractive. Well, that's an impossible place to be. Right. And you've got to be willing to run the risk of elevating your erotic attraction into an attraction to the whole person. That's part of what becoming a couple would be.
Right.
Do I think some form of advice is useful here? You kind of start up, I think, well, what do you say? I'm more story-based, I would say, than I'm argument-based in this regard. I try to describe a potential future about how approaching a woman because you find her attractive, how that becomes a kind of love story. A lot of love stories have kind of unhappy endings. Just listen to the songs. But it only takes one happy ending.
Right. To make it worthwhile.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like that helps young men to take the first step. And if they take the first step, you often don't have to give them much more advice about any more steps, because they'll find a woman who thinks, it's actually kind of nice that a young man said something clear enough. I knew what he was talking about. Right. At Notre Dame, and I've said this to students too, the murkiest interactions between men and women are among theology majors. Because they've embedded a certain kind of Catholicism as niceness picture. And man, then the likelihood that the women are going to find the men confusingly being interested but withholding their interest as if that is the way to stay dignified. Right. Dignity is one of the things that I talk about in my book, in Plato's Bedroom. I focus on it in the chapter that's on Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. Wanting to be somebody's sexual partner is not essentially a dignified thing. Of course, it can be elevated into the marriage relationship. But if you're trying always to hold on to your own dignity by treating somebody else with so much dignity that that person can't be acknowledged as sexually attractive to you, now dignity has become a blockage of something human rather than an expression of something human. Right. So For myself, I've never found a more powerful working through that than Thomas Mann's novella, Death in Venice.
I see.
And it's curious, when I first started teaching Mann's novella, the obstacle to it was the homosexuality. That was the place where people would find something that might block them from letting the book really work on them. Over time, that disappeared because everybody wanted to be pro-homosexuality, but they didn't want to be pro-pedophilia. Ooh, right. Now that became a real blocker.
Right.
But what I found then, I started to hit a third stage, and the thing that was blocking it was simply sexuality. It was sexuality as such that was the blocker. And that is just a weird place for people to live.
Yeah.
Because there's something that's not being acknowledged.
Right.
And to go back to the tough guy aspect of the incel identity, they're making too big a deal out of something because they don't want to acknowledge the loss, what they've lost. So they're trying to make
it scientific.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. And that move to making it scientific, again, this is right out of Dostoevsky. They should all read Notes from Underground. It's like the mouse man who lives underground. He's their man. I think that is something you can escape from with one good first date.
Yeah.
Just one. Now,
or one good novel.
Well, look, novels are really good prep.
Right. But you need the real thing.
You need the real thing.
Yeah.
You need the real thing.
And so obviously the $1 million question is, what causes this? Is it the corporatization of university? Is it maybe like the Me Too movements and males not wanting to get caught up in all of that? Is it a broader nihilism spread through culture? What has caused this? Yeah.
Boy, the causes are always hard. Let me pick up the corporatization issue.
Yeah.
Because that's a real issue. And that issue falls onto the women much more personally and directly than it does for the men. The young women are taught and they realize that the way that high-end corporate careers work, your late 20s through your mid-30s are the crucial moment when you break through a certain plateau. And to do that uses all your time. That's also the moment in your life when your fertility goes from high to low. And I don't think that problem is solvable in contemporary corporate structures. I think that is the shape of careers. I think young women are right to perceive this.
Right. In other words, there's a fork in the road. Either become a mom or become a career woman.
There is. If you're going to make partner in a law firm, that's very hard to do if you also have 3 small children. If you're going to become a tenured professor, lots of women in the academy, while they're graduate students, will be told by their mentors to put off having children. Exactly because it's the same sort of pressures that there are in any other corporate form of life. University careers are highly corporatized in that regard. So, how solvable is that problem, Jonathan?
Right. Not solvable, right?
Every problem's solvable by opting out, but that seems like a very extreme thing. I'm old enough to remember that debates about feminism, let's say round about early 70s, first half of the 70s, a lot of those debates or discussions were about reforming corporate life, broadly speaking.
I see. To make it
Career
more
paths.
hospitable, yeah.
Yes, I thought that was a very rich time. I don't think anybody came to conclusions, but they were asking the right question. I think that question kind of went away.
Wait, but in some sense, society has answered that question.
Yeah.
And the answer is marriage is later, women freeze their eggs, right?
That was the answer, became a technological answer.
Right. But I mean, what other possible answer is there if you want
The answer that people were trying to explore is, can corporations structure jobs for both men and women as if they have a primary responsibility to their marriage as procreative? That was the central question.
Right.
And unfortunately, the answer that people fell into was, doesn't really have to be procreative.
Right.
That was the direction things went. And really, I remember when you first started to see mainstream articles about, ambitious elite women while they're in college should freeze their eggs and save those. Because then, when they're in their late 30s or early 40s and their career path has already gotten over the plateau, then they can go back. And I thought at the time that was completely unreal, because who are they going to go back with? Are there lots of 40-year-old men seeking a wife to unfreeze their eggs with her? Yeah. Right, there was something so unreal about that.
Yeah. Although with the current incel movement, they might get that. Happy coincidence.
I feel like the whole IVF technology as a way of addressing the kind of problems about women not being able to find men when they're in this very high intensity career phase. I think that is a very false promise to women.
Right, I see. Yeah. I want to explore more about the issues facing women in modernity, but let's go back to one point you said about men, about how these incels are giving an over-masculine depiction of what has gone wrong. And I think that's interesting because in your book, you claim that the first symposiists to speak in the symposium are also given an overly masculine picture about love. And Socrates eventually corrects it. So tell us about that and what resources there may be to help us in modernity. Yeah.
In Plato's Symposium, you get a whole set of speakers who are all basically defending pederasty. They're all defending a social form in which an older man, usually say in his 30s, is erotically attracted to a man who's a mid to late teenager. You kind of hit your erotic expiration date when you first started to really grow a beard when you were around 20, right? So that's the social form. And it's clear they were racked with anxiety about this. They thought, I don't know. I mean, it seems like you're feminizing the young men just when they should be becoming real men. How are we going to do that? Well, we'll try to say it's educational. Then why are you touching my thigh, teacher? Something's not quite right there. It's like there's something they're not saying about the erotic attachment. Plato is working with all of those social anxieties in a way that is thoroughly comic. I mean, it's very funny to watch these guys trying to justify the life they want by describing some other life that's not really the one that they wanted there.
Right.
And so this worry that there's something that undermines a certain picture of manliness as a devotion to reason, particularly a devotion to reason.
Right.
How reasonable is being erotically crazy about somebody?
Yeah.
Like that. So Plato's poking people about that. Now, in the end, he thinks Eros can be a very powerful elevator of human desire and human aspiration. And that includes the life of the mind. But he also thinks that we have to recognize that we can't just argue our way into an erotic life either. So he sets it up so that the first three speakers really all want to show that, you can be a really smart guy and have Eros just be one controllable bit of your life. But it's controllable. And we don't want...
It's tameable.
Yes, it is. It's a tame lion. We've got that, And Plato breaks up the party on that with the speech of the great comic writer, Aristophanes. Aristophanes is the one who says, I'm going to give a speech not at all like your speeches. And the core of his speech really is not to allow relationships between an older man and a younger man to be the centerpiece. And he's the first speaker who makes procreative erotic relations between a male and a female a central part of his account of Eros. And that changes the dialogue entirely. From that point on, the question of whether a human life can be androgynous, in the sense that it integrates something that's masculine and something that's feminine through something that is procreatively erotic. That becomes the central question. So I think Plato already got there. And the high point of that discussion is the notion that the erotic life is reproduction, is procreation in the beautiful. That's what it is. And Socrates, in his account of it, does suggest that spiritual children are higher than merely physical children. But of course, real children are spiritual children.
You have to inculcate virtues.
You sure do. I mean, you're taking on a long educational task when you have children. And that's part of the glory of having children. You want that task.
Right.
So Plato, as surprising as it may be, he actually found his way to something to complete it, I would say, and I don't think Plato did complete it. To complete the intellectual project of the symposium, I think you have to elevate marriage as such. And that is a great challenge to the way philosophy has identified itself through all these centuries.
Right.
How many great philosophers were great husbands or great wives?
Right, or even had wives,
yes.
right?
Yes. So Plato challenges philosophy's self-image in his own time as something that, women, they're kind of emotional, they're not really rational. Men, when we talk to each other, that's man stuff.
Right.
He challenges that. Well, that's an extraordinary cultural achievement to have been able to do that.
Yeah, because what's very interesting is that in the book, you said not only do these men, much like the incels, give an overly masculine picture of love to try to tame it. In the same way that the incel gives an overly analytical picture of what's gone wrong to sort of control their anxieties. But you also said that philosophy itself was overly masculine, and that's something that Plato was trying to correct. And by that, I suppose you mean that philosophy itself also needs to bring in the non-rational elements, or tell us about that. Yeah.
Yes, and of course, philosophers, to say we need to bring in the non-rational elements, that's a good starting point. But of course, that already presupposes the masculine thing. Okay, the rational elements are these things, right? If you teach intro to philosophy, it's almost inevitable. You're going to teach a couple of techniques. Okay, you got to be able to tell the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions. And you've got to know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. Now, valid and sound, that way of using those words just is not normal English. So you've got to get on our team about regimenting how you make arguments. And then if you're really good, the next thing we'll do is teach you how to do counterexamples. I mean, that's bro world right there, right? There's a certain picture of what philosophy is that makes learning those techniques the thing that you got to have to be a philosopher. Now, all three of those are really useful intellectual techniques, and I'm all for them. But there are a lot of other things that go into thinking as well. So there's a sort of narrow view of thinking, call it rationality, that seems to me in competition with a much richer kind of thinking, call it thoughtfulness. And Plato is so good at the rationality argument forming, so he can make arguments just like that.
All day, yeah.
Just great at it. But he has this deep thoughtfulness that also sees that there's a specific motive, especially for the clever young, and clever young men particularly, to love the arguments more than they love the thing they're arguing about. In the Republic, Socrates has his famous description of how, if you teach dialectic to the young too early, they're like puppies who just tear apart shoes.
Yeah, right. No philosophy before 30.
Yes, yeah, you gotta wait for a little while in there. Well, the symposium's doing some of the same kind of work there.
Right.
There is a way of presenting yourself there's a way of presenting philosophy as something that really you've got to become a man to do. Whether you're a man or a woman, you got to become a man to do it, because you have to push away these other things. And then you can demote all those other things culturally and say, yeah, those are kind of fit for women. Plato didn't believe that.
Right.
If all you've got are arguments, you're not going to know how to be thoughtful with stories.
Right.
And that's going to be a pretty disastrous place to be.
Right. So let me try to square the circle. In the domain of love, when you're overly masculine, you try to tame it. Maybe you give a scientific explanation of love and think that's the end-all be-all, as one of the symposiasts do.
Yeah.
Or maybe you give an account about how love makes people better warriors. That's quite,
yes.
That's quite manly, right?
One of the funniest of the moves, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, yes, there's nothing that would make a better army than a bunch
pairs of lovers.
Oh, how wonderful that would be.
Right. And so to be open to the, let's say, the feminine, or to not be constrained by the masculine, let me put it that way, in love, would be to be open to the ecstasy of love, the fact that it can make us a bit divinely mad and it makes us a bit crazy. Whereas in philosophy, to not be limited by the masculine means to open us to the sensitivities of life, right? And so that we are not just constrained by the analytical, the agonistic kind of argumentative form, but to have a fundamental sensitivity and openness to life.
Yes.
So that's what Plato's trying to do. That's the isomorphism between these two spheres that he's trying to demasculinize. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so. And to take a philosopher who is important to both of us, Nietzsche. Nietzsche's interesting to think about this way. Nietzsche's a wonderful and wonderfully funny critic of hyper-rationalism.
Of course, yeah.
But he also, it seems to me, embeds an anxiety about whether he's sufficiently manly. And so he's also very critical of women and of things that don't look tough guy enough. He lapses into a rhetoric that you could see somebody like Bronze Age pervert or other incel type voices thinking, well, I'm really going all Nietzschean here. They're wrong about that because they have such a small understanding of Nietzsche. But it is fair to say that Nietzsche himself, I think, lapses into that kind of rhetoric. And Plato doesn't lapse into that kind of rhetoric, or at least he does it very little, because he's so confident in what he's achieving. I think Nietzsche always comes across a little bit as
insecure. Right?
He's still going through a puberty, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He's still showing the tough guyish.
Yeah, that's what Robert Pippin, when we discussed Nietzsche, he says, by the fact that Nietzsche had to state, I am so great, you can tell the kind of anxiety
There's
right?
a
Right. But
thing.
Plato never says in the dialogues, and then
Doesn't have
my
to.
books will be read for
Yes.
2,000 years, and they have.
Yes.
And the only
Yes.
author in antiquity that has come down to us completely unlost, and yeah, that's interesting. So let's move on to talk about the issues facing modern women. And
Sure.
you described one of them, which is this corporatization and the issue with career. But I mean, the stat that is incredibly frightening to me is 5 to 10% of women in America aged 18 to 24 are on OnlyFans. Like selling pictures of their like naked
Yeah.
help me understand this, because
Yes.
how does
Yeah.
like the culmination of like 300 years 200 years of like women empowerment end in like the mass commodification of like women? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a terrible thing. You know, and of course it's presented as empowerment.
As entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
We're entrepreneurs, we're
Yeah.
content creators.
Yeah. The desire to be visible and to be attractive is a natural and wholesome desire. But every natural and wholesome desire is susceptible of a corruption when it's made partial and it's not balanced or integrated with other desires. What is it that attracts enough contemporary women to want to be seen with erotic desire? Because they know they're being used as a masturbation tool.
Oh, interesting. You read that as a desire for recognition. I thought it was more like monetary.
I don't think, Jonathan, that
it's an economic. You don't think it's an economic?
Some people make money.
Right.
So it's true. Some people make money, and money's always relevant. But I don't think that could drive the phenomenon.
Right.
You know, look, there are plenty of women who put pornographic images or videos of themselves online before there was a way to monetize it.
Right. Interesting.
And I think it's that felt visibility. That's a very potent thing in a human life. You know, we could go all Hegel on recognition and things like that. I would want to go back to that as the center of the OnlyFans phenomenon. I think it's that desire for visibility that takes many different forms. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give a student, it's never praise, it's visibility. It's that
I see you.
That moment when you think, my teacher is actually interested in what I'm doing. That is a formative moment in the life of an intellectual, because it gives you somewhere to go. And that moment when somebody reveals to you, you're attractive to me, that's a very important moment in a growing relationship. Right. And one can want the pleasure without the structure. Yeah. Without the structure. That's the way I think of the OnlyFans thing.
Interesting.
I think of it as intensely lonely.
And therefore, we can read that as almost the counterpoint to the incel movement and the weakness of the male urge to show that recognition, right?
Yes.
It might be read as the natural consequence of men not being able to reveal their physical attraction in real life, causing this sort of starvation of recognition.
I think so. I've read Jane Austen novels with students a lot over the years. And when I talk to students about Jane Austen, one of the things they're always struck by is how important dances or balls are. And they're important because everybody knows that balls are constructed to be places where safely, without loss of face, men and women can express sexual interest in each other.
Right.
Yeah, Jane Austen wasn't stupid. She knew dancing is sexual.
Right.
But of course, it's elevated and it points forward somewhere. All over universities, students will say they wish there were more chaperoned events. They won't use exactly that language.
Right.
There used to be events called mixers, right? Now, nobody calls them that anymore, except with great irony. But people sort of wish, men and women wish, there were places where to express an interest in somebody as attractive and to accept that interest weren't so close to being sexualized. You know, right? If he asks me out for coffee, does that mean that if I say yes, I'm accepting having sexual intercourse with him? Well, no wonder a man doesn't want ask a woman out on a date if that's the emotional load it carries.
Right.
But adults have given up, have abdicated the moral responsibility of creating a space where young men and women can express interests without there being
Right.
all on them. The question of, yeah, but what's the limit on that? If saying, I would like to go out with you is heard as, I expect to sleep with you, you can't expect happy results for young people under those conditions. How do we get that toothpaste back in the tube?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how to get that toothpaste back in the tube. But this is why reading older things with students is often very helpful to them. Because I don't say that then they figure it out, but at least now they have a name to put on what the issue is for themselves.
Right. And they know that there's an alternative.
They
right?
do.
It's really interesting because you begin the book by highlighting not how the reality of our love life has been so diminished, but how the language of our love life has been so diminished.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, that in ancient Greek, the word for the conjugal act is just a plural form of the things of Aphrodite, aphrodisia, which is a wonderful, beautiful word.
Divine.
Yes, because there's something that we feel as coming from outside about erotic desire, and something that we feel as elevating about it, but dangerous. You don't get to ascend without danger. That's the way erotic life is. So the very basic vocabulary of what we would call sex or sexuality doesn't exist in ancient Greek. It doesn't exist in English until the second half of the 19th century. The use of the word sex to mean sexual activity, that's a very recent innovation in human life and in English, in the English language. So that the language that sounds sort of polite about erotic life and its achievement, its accomplishment in English, it all comes from the language of public health. It's a medicalized language.
Sexual intercourse.
Sexual intercourse. You
know, Malthus, right?
Yeah. It goes back to Malthus' essay on population,
right,
which is an essay on contraception.
Right. A worry about.
Yes, that's where it comes from. When he used the phrase sexual intercourse, and he's obviously pointing toward actual physical intercourse, the act that makes babies, it was a complete euphemism, because sexual intercourse, when he wrote it, would have just meant what a mixer used to be at a college campus, somewhere where men and women got to know each other. But of course, he was assuming the completion of the mixing. uh, but very quickly then, the term starts to be used as a specific term. It's medicalized. It becomes part of a public health discourse.
Right.
Sexual intercourse, it doesn't even sound like anything you would want. It's like, no, I don't really want to have sexual intercourse. I think I'll go have my teeth cleaned. I mean,
Right.
it's from the same part of language.
Right.
And very few lovers, except in moments of, again, irony, would say to each other the phrase, would you like to have sexual intercourse? That's just, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't, so we're very impoverished because our language often is the portal to our feelings too and our aspirations.
Right. Yeah. Whereas the ancient languages, whether it's Eros or Aphrodite or the Romanized Venus, are all kind of divine kind of connotations. Today, erotic is pornography.
That's
right?
what it is.
Aphrodisiac is like a drug, and venereal is a disease, right? And we've even the language of love has been corrupted. I see that, but how do you reconcile that with the idea that in modernity, love has also been elevated to an extraordinary degree? Whether it's, for example, making love a constitutive quality of marriage, which was not the case like before, let's say, Rousseau or something like that, or just how love seems to be the only elevated feeling today that is still acceptable rather than, say, glory or something like that. So how do you make sense of, on one hand, of the linguistic poverty, but on the other hand, the rise of love as a cultural ideal? Yeah.
I think people overstate the distinctiveness of love as a part of marriage being very specifically quite modern.
Interesting.
I think that cultures where there are what we call arranged marriages, people always fell in love. It's just that the mediation of the young people who are of marriageable age finding themselves had a lot more social thickness in it than it does for us. And that can take lots of different forms. When you read Jane Austen, the old adults kind of know what they're setting up when they set up balls, right? They are setting people up to see if they want to become marriage partners. So those are pretty arranged marriages too. It's just, it's not as explicit as it is in some other cultures now still. I think that people always expected a profound personal affection and commitment to be a part of what the marital relationship was. So I push back a bit
on the rise narrative.
Yes.
Right. For you, it's more of a decline narrative.
I think so. I don't want to throw away the notion. I think you're right that the notion that a marriage between a man and woman can't just be focused on having a successful household. There's a personal relationship between the two of them that has to be sustained and deepened. I think that is a more important question for modern couples than it used to be. But I suspect that married couples always had a lot lot of that.
Right.
It's a natural thing.
But it's a change in
grows.
emphasis.
It is a change in emphasis.
It's not a brand new, I see.
Yes.
So
yes.
I want to critique your suggestion of elevating union, marriage, intimacy, as well as reproduction.
Yeah.
But internally, from these two traditions, the Catholic tradition, the Platonic tradition, 3 critiques. The first one is, as you mentioned, Plato puts physical reproduction as the lowest.
Yes.
And even though you could say, well, raising a kid is spiritual reproduction, because you're inculcating virtues, in the symposium itself, when this is brought up, the examples that Diotima, the sort of priestess who's lecturing Socrates, that she gives is like founding states, managing states together, writing poetry as the highest forms, right? So philosophical reproduction is just higher than physical reproduction.
Yes.
The second critique comes from the Catholic tradition, which is that up until Vatican II, I believe, chastity was the higher ideal,
Yes.
even over an observant, a married man or married woman. And the third one is, I don't see any of the importance of marriage that you're picking up in Plato, because I don't think Plato sees union or intimacy or joining two to one flesh as that important. And I think you can see this in how flexible the arrangements, the erotic arrangements are in Plato, where in the laws it's monogamy, but in the Republic it's like a communal shared kind of marriage. And Socrates, has a wife, Xanthippe, but he's still chasing young beauties around town, falling in love, right?
He does have children, though.
Yeah, he does have children, yeah. So how do you respond to that, these kind of concerns?
I don't think Plato got all the way. But each dialogue is interestingly different. Certainly the laws, the centrality of marriage that really depends on a kind of personal fidelity between the spouses. That's an important aspect of the laws, but it's not a primary focus of Plato's exposition there. The Republic famously, in effect, eliminates marriage as a personal relationship and makes it a civic relationship. And now we would get into all of the debates about how we read that. Is that meant to be a serious practice? Is it meant to be a demonstration that, look, if you're going to go all the way down this road and say that unity is the most important thing for a political community, the greatest obstacle to unity is
the nuclear
families.
Right.
So you got to get rid of it. Here's the cost. So I actually read that more
as a critique.
Right. As saying, if this is what philosophy is, this is where it will take you in the end.
I see.
So I think there's a challenge to philosophy already embedded in that account in the Republic.
Like as being the only masculine, rational kind of philosophy. Yes. If we're going for pure reason, pure unity, this is where it's going to take you. Interesting. Fascinating.
The Republic does talk about Eros.
Yeah.
But it talks about Eros much more like those first three speakers in the symposium did. And I think Plato meant us to see that. But that's a complex conversation about the Republic and about how one learns from it. And I'm tipping the Republic in the direction of the symposium when I say, I think that discussion of the community of women and children, which is really the destruction of the personal family, I think that readers are meant to see there's something in me that would take me there.
Right.
And I need to examine what, if it would take me there, I need to examine
the validity of that thing.
Yes.
Right. I see.
Yes.
But how do you respond to the objection that in Plato, it seems like the union is, at least secondary, if it's a goal at all, to the elevation and rise to philosophy.
Yeah. So the way it works itself out in the symposium, the great speech on unity, and the one that sounds the most like our own ideals about what marriage would be,
is Aristophanes.
Speech. And of the 7 speeches, it's the middle one. It's the fourth one.
Right.
And after Socrates reports Diotima's speech, Aristophanes is going to respond to the critique, but he can't because a crazy bunch of revelers burst in. Lots of neat stuff about that. But Plato is asking you, what would Aristophanes' response have been? Because the fundamental issue that's raised is whether we fundamentally seek union or whether we fundamentally seek the good. And is there a tension between those two things?
Right.
Could you go back to Aristophanes' speech, preserve Aristophanes' really marvelous discussion of how broken we feel
Right. When we're
without the
alone, right?
wholeness achieved in erotic connection. Could you retrieve that for philosophical aspiration? Or is there just a fundamental tension
Yeah.
between unity and a kind of intellectualized procreativity?
Yeah.
I think Plato left that as an exercise for the reader. I don't think he ever fully achieved it myself. So when I see some specifically Catholic understandings of how unity and procreativity, those aren't just two independent goals of marriage. They're mutually interpreting goals. The specific type of union that marital union is different from just the unity of friendship.
Right.
Because it has built into it that procreative potency. Right. So I think of myself as working as a Catholic thinker on this, as trying to complete Plato's project, not rejecting it.
Right.
Those are different relationships.
Yeah.
And so I don't say that everything I find in Plato
is already there. Right. But you're saying it's latent, or Plato's giving you an invitation.
I think so. I think Plato gets, to use a very traditional vocabulary here, Plato gets as far as natural reason can get.
I see. So this is why I think the most difficult challenge to what you propose so far must be the internal Catholic suggestion that chastity, right, the non-union, non-procreative life devoted solely to God is higher than the perfectly, like observant married life.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that?
Yes, and let me start by saying that I think you're quite right that since Vatican II, a lot of Catholics have wanted to back off of the notion that the life of priestly celibacy or of vowed celibacy for women is in an important way spiritually higher than the life of vowed marriage. Now, vowed marriage, right? So that's also a supernatural relationship.
Right.
It's under vows. So
which makes the claim even stronger.
It does make it stronger.
Right.
And I would point to a really central aspect of this. There is something sacrificial from a merely natural point of view about the life of vowed celibacy compared to the life of vowed marriage. There's something sacrificial about it. That sacrifice can only make sense if there is some higher spiritual good that is achieved and pursued in that life of vowed celibacy. And I think the tradition has always wanted to focus on that, so that the priest becomes, in a way, an exemplar for married couples, because celibacy shows an even greater willingness to take on what is, from a natural point of view, a sacrifice for a supernatural end. And Catholic marriage as vowed marriage, it also has a supernatural dimension that will need to take on sacrifices that a merely natural marriage would not.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the direction that I would go. Now, I wouldn't expect to carry every reader, every student, every conversation to that same view. And partly because I wouldn't expect to be successful in convincing everybody of my view of marriage.
Right. Even that is right. Even that is somewhat of a stretch. Yeah. Right. Another critique, this is more personal rather than imminent critique I have of your proposal of getting married earlier than you think. Like have children earlier. This is your advice to young people.
Yes.
I guess my own hesitancy towards that is, it's also easier because I'm a man and not a woman, is that being single offers a kind of personal exploration and a kind of ability to pivot that is difficult or that may be limited in a relationship. You had this wonderful line in your book that you said, only a child thinks that every limitation is a restriction on one's freedom. And my response to that would be, and only a fool would think that every restriction is an enhancement of freedom, right?
Yes.
So I'll give you a very practical one. I'm dating a very beautiful Catholic girl now. I'm still kind of seeking myself on my own religious convictions. And she's told me, I will only marry a Catholic man. You know, and so if I were to marry her, like that one thing is an incredibly important part of my life that I am in all earnestness exploring, I would have to make a very strong commitment there. And that's just one example, right? Where you live, like the depending on the person, the political commitments. So is there nothing to be said about letting the individual blossom a bit before finding someone to be joined with?
No, there's nothing to be said for that, Jonathan.
Case closed.
Yes, now, let me put it this way. What you are as an individual is essentially described by your power to couple. And so I'm very skeptical about thinking that, well, I should develop for a while before I become a couple because that might constrict my development. It will definitely influence your development, but I can't see that development as a constriction.
Right. But surely you see, okay, let's start with...
If you married the wrong woman, it would be.
Right.
But you know what? You'll make yourself the right man by finding the right woman. The growth is mutual, and the growth is always a greater union as well.
I see, right. So the claim is not the extreme claim that any union will obviously accelerate your growth. It's that the best union will accelerate the growth than the best individual. That's the kind of claim.
Yes, I think so. But I don't want to emphasize the word best too much, right?
As if it's a marketplace.
That sounds like a blocking word, doesn't it?
I see.
Best. Well, yeah. So if one of your friends say, "Yeah, but is she the best one for you?" Oh, best. Ooh, well, man, she's good enough one for me, right? And you grow into being married. See, one mistake I think sometimes happens with young women when you talk to them about men they're interested in is when they describe the ideal man, they pretty much describe a guy who's been married for 20 years and raised 3 children. Well, they're not going to start out like that, okay? But they'll grow into that, as you will grow into that too.
Right.
So I have more confidence in marriage as for most of us. Marriage is the context of moral pedagogy. That's where we will grow, and it will teach us to grow most directly and in the most focused way.
It's not slowing down, it's not settling down, it's speeding up, right?
No.
But sorry, conditional on finding the right person.
Yes, but there are a lot of right people.
Right.
This is why I want to push back on the best thing.
Yeah.
See, that sounds like an avoidance behavior to me.
Right. Like, is she really the best? Right, as an excuse almost. So let me ask you this. Obviously, right, we don't want to set the constraints too narrow, such that it has to be this, angel, like Galadriel or something like that from Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
But we also don't want to set the constraints too wide, such that anyone we could see ourselves married with. That is empirically just not true. So I guess my question is, given that we aren't being married to the perfect wife or perfect husband who has had 20 years of experience, what should a young person look for when they are selecting someone with potential but not actuality?
Yeah. Take the case of a young man who finds he's falling in love with a young woman who's a Catholic. And for her, when she sees herself as a married woman, she sees herself married as a Catholic.
Right.
Which means she wants a Catholic spouse too.
Right.
the most important aspect of that deep desire is at the natural level. The most important desire at a supernatural level is she wants someone who, where you'll help each other get to heaven and raise children who will get to heaven. Put that way, it's a little corny, right? But at a deeply,
like passing the DMV
yes,
test.
yes, at a deeply human level, she wants to know you won't leave.
Right, I see. It's the marriage, the commitment of the marriage, right?
Yeah. She wants to know that when you say the vows, you have the moral agency to mean them, for better, for worse, till death. Now, I don't say that the only men or women who can mean those vows
are
Catholic, but I do say that if you find yourself becoming the man who wants to mean those vows, you will find a lot of aspects of being a Catholic attractive as the fulfillment of that identity. So if I were going to have a kind of a mentor relationship to you to talk about that, these would be things we would talk about. And now we get into very complicated questions here about, well, how much do I have to believe it?
Yeah, exactly.
And what
Because as a
a
philosopher, surely I don't want to believe in the resurrection because I want to get married to a girl instrumentally, right?
Yeah, I'd push back on Shirley. I mean, I think that one reason certain religious things start to make sense for you is that you can see now, so to speak, the system, to use John Henry Newman's word, the system that they fit into. And part of that's a lived system. That's not just an intellectual system. And that woman is what is creating that system. So to start to believe certain things because they make sense out of the kind of love you have for a particular woman, that's not anti-philosophical, though it's anti-one-way philosophy can see itself.
In other ways, you're reminding me to not be too masculine in my philosophy, right? To be open to how life's demands, to be sensitive to life's demands.
And of course, that is one way of being masculine, right? That's a side that the incels lose.
Yeah, but okay, let me push back again on this, like.
But look, I'm making you happier.
Yeah. Like, surely for these religions, the metaphysical question is primary, right? Which is, did Jesus rise from the cross? Like, do we reincarnate? Did Buddha find the path to nirvana? Like, surely that must be the primary. And I'm not saying we can directly answer those primary metaphysical questions, but surely that is what is significant, right?
Yeah. The way you've just described things, and I think this is quite common in philosophy, you've made metaphysics a foundation. I don't see metaphysics as foundational. I see metaphysics as a capstone. So I think your metaphysics is held in place by the pressures of all the other parts of your belief. I don't think it's a foundation stone on which you build up all of the other beliefs.
Right.
So I think of metaphysics as the top of the ascent rather than as the base of the ascent. Obviously, there's a lot more one could say about all of that. But as a teacher, I try to deflect students, sometimes students who are a certain kind of Thomist, for example. Other students are certain kinds of Aristotelians, and they feel like, no, I've got Aristotle, now I'm safe, right? I don't think that's really the way metaphysics works. I don't even think that's the way Aristotle and Thomas really work. So what you're describing is they have to get the metaphysics right. I think that's true, but I don't think it's true as a foundation. I think that we're always going to have uh, doubts, incompleteness in our religious beliefs. The, uh, you know, Pope Benedict, back when he was still Joseph Ratzinger, he said something really important, that the heart of a Christian is not a set of beliefs, it's a person. And that person is Christ. And he was trying to get people to reorient their own sense of intellectual aspiration. I mean, he's talking primarily to fellow theologians when he says that. If you reorganize your sense of aspiration from something like a system of beliefs to something like a completed assent of love, it's going to look different. It's going to look different.
Interesting. So faith is less like a rational system rather than like the process of falling in erotic love.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And look, there's a lot of thoughtfulness about falling in love.
Right.
Right? That is not a thoughtless thing.
Right.
That's one of the difference from just quick rush of infatuation and the actual adult falling in love, and the thoughtfulness that goes into that, and the place of conversation in that too.
But it's not grounded on thought alone, right?
It's not. No, thought has a power of assent. I mean, in this way, I am very much a Platonist. That thought is motivating and it's motivated. And I think that we can't eliminate that by having a kind of neutral stance where we're just trying to get the facts lined up right, or the arguments lined up right.
Right.
That's why in my book, John Henry Newman comes up so early, along with Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yeah.
Because they both took on the burden of saying, no, my thought is personal.
Yeah. I think this is a good place to bring up something that's been troubling me on my kind of seeking path. And then we're going to weave our way back into love. But I'll talk about this religious problem. And it has to do not with modern skepticism, which is what I take Newman to be addressing and to have successfully addressed, right? Which is, we can't fully rationally know what is the role of faith. I'm convinced there already. Like, I'm ready to take a leap. But my question is, leap whither? And the kind of skepticism that I'm wrestling with in my seeking path is ancient skepticism, the skepticism of Sextus Empiricus, namely equipollence. That it's not that I don't find what you say compelling and convincing, it's that there are other compelling and convincing systems that are directly against the claim that you just made, and I have no way of differentiating. And so my response to you about treating religion as less like a scientific exercise, but as an exercise in love, and where your heart follows, and grounded on reason nonetheless, is simply to say, and the other faiths say the same. And there are the great theologians of, let's say, Islam, the Al-Ghazalis of the world, who are incredibly thoughtful, and he opened his heart, and it led to Allah. And I will push you that maybe the erotic domain is different from the religious domain, in the sense that I don't need to get the erotic domain right in the sense of finding the exact right person in the 1 billion people in order for me to have success in that domain. Whereas in religion, because of the difference of metaphysical claims and potentially the different things you need to do to secure your eternal salvation, the stakes are much higher, right? Or like what you need for success is much higher. And that's why I'm totally comfortable with falling in love with this one girl, even though I could totally fall in love with another girl, whereas I'm not comfortable making the leap of faith, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think you're right to look at ancient skepticism here. Their strategy of equipoise, right? That you try to find beliefs that are counterweights to each other so that you don't feel rationally committed to either one of them.
Right.
It's important that that's a very motivated philosophical doctrine or way of life. And it's motivated by the desire to avoid spiritual turbulence, the Greek word ataraxia. So part of what makes ancient skepticism actually humanly much deeper, I think, than more Enlightenment skepticism, is that it understood that it had a motive. Right. And its primary motive is to have a life of a kind of spiritual peace.
Right.
Notice it's not primarily truth-seeking. And it's utterly de-eroticized because of that. So ancient skepticism, it understands thoughtfulness as needing peace. You can't be all stirred up.
Right. No divine madness.
Yes. And to do that, it quite intelligently and systematically looks at the way, there are arguments on this side, there are arguments on that side. And the way to avoid yourself getting all stirred up by one argument is to have other arguments that kind of leave you in this nice neutral place.
Right.
That's a very powerful human ideal. But I think it's a false ideal. And it's not an ideal I would embrace for myself. And it's not an ideal I'd have you embrace either.
Right. Because it's non-committal.
It is.
Right.
It is. Now we've got an interesting place, because now it's not the arguments between Islam and Judaism and Christianity, but to feel like, I'm actually pretty happy being a scholar of religion rather than having a religion, because I can see all these things have good arguments on their side. I've got to ask how stable a place that is, or why is it an attractive place?
So let me clarify here. I would be incredibly happy if I could commit to a religion.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
Even if that, what you say is true for the ancient skeptics, that it's this intellectual move to be non-committal, that at least, given my subconscious could be different, is not consciously what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to actually find the truth.
Yes.
And so, but nonetheless, the intellectual problem that they raises problems for me that prevents me from giving it my all and taking a leap. And so let me just ask you this, which is, I imagine as a scholar yourself, you haven't investigated the most sophisticated forms of other religions' response to Christianity. It's just almost impossible if you think about all the religions. So how can you be sure? And because one of the reasons that Hegel set up his phenomenology in this chain of exhaustive sequences is to address equipollence. That you have to show that every part of the set is not right except for this one part. And so think about what you would say perhaps to a Jew who's for whatever reason never come across Christianity, right? You would say, you're so close. Just take a look at this and see how we complete you. Well, that, spoiler alert, is how some of the Buddhists interpret Christianity. Sure. You guys are so close. And if only you understood the truth of emptiness, and you see how Jesus worked as best as he could with the materials of the time.
Yes.
But you have to investigate this. And so that is what is preventing me. So how would you go about addressing that?
Yeah. Well, in order to address it, what stance do we have to each other? On the one hand, you can have a stance, and this is very common in the academic world, of I've got arguments that I give to you as a kind of advisor in that sense. Think of your relationship to what I say under those conditions to a quite different relationship, that of a counselor. If you come to me as a friend, and what you want is counsel, and what I give you is advice, something didn't go quite right, because to give you counsel, I have to find something that is internal to the movement of your own thoughtfulness.
Right.
I have to
Meet you where you're at, right?
it's a different kind of conversation, you know. So I think a counselor has to help you find both what desires or motives elevate you and therefore make you attracted to certain solutions, and also have to help you identify where your reservations or your fears are that make you hesitant of going in certain directions. I think the way that you're describing the hesitations, I would want to think about that. Because it's a very academic kind of hesitation, that
Right.
the evidence seems to be no stronger for X than it is for Y or for Z.
Yeah, maybe let me add this one qualification, which was I was raised Christian somewhat, so I had a subjective experience, and I also practiced in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery.
Yeah.
So it's not a merely, and that's not what you were saying, but it's not a merely rational
No,
evidence
no,
examining.
it's experiential.
It's an experiential. It's a
Yes.
first person. It's a first person like,
Yes.
I could see how I could totally commit to Christianity. And then I could see how this Buddhist worldview is coherent. And then when I see those two things, and then I read about the great lives of the great, let's say, Sufi mystics, of the great Islamic theologians of the Islamic Golden Age, and their genuine and earnest devotion to their tradition, that is the trouble that has been stirred in me.
Yes, and those the hero stories of the saints. The more they ascend, the more they start to look rather alike.
Exactly,
too.
right.
There's something really striking about
but
that.
But clearly it's different, right? Either
is
Jesus
different.
is deceitful, he's the Messiah, or he's only a prophet. It's at best it's one of them.
You can only get one of those guys going. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't think you should expect something that looks like an argument for superiority of one system. Right, all of these have been developed for
by
1,500
geniuses,
years.
by complete geniuses. Yeah.
So they all have a powerfully systematic character, so that if there are 1,000 things in Buddhism and Judaism, in Christianity and Islam, if there are 1,000 things, they are all mutually supporting.
Right. It's coherent. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a part of their glory, but none of us activates all 1,000 at a time.
Yeah.
Right. That's just too much to ask for.
So what do you expect is going to break the equipollence, if anything, for me? If it's not a kind of rational examination, what's the
I think being in love with something, and that doesn't have to be a person.
Right. And now we're back to the conversation about love.
I think so.
Right. I see.
Yeah. So I think thought is essentially personal. And of course, I think part of the way that we enrich and indeed find the personal is through something like being a scholar. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, right? But I still think there is something that's essentially personal about what thoughtfulness is.
Right.
And that would be, I suppose that would be my offer to you. Because I think the way you describe the problem of, I always like to call it equipoise, because I like that word for it. And I think that sense of maintaining your poise really captures part of what's so attractive about it.
Yeah.
I've been much influenced by John Henry Newman about this, particularly about his account of why a gentleman which it's a wonderful thing to be a cultivated gentleman, but it doesn't make you a Christian.
Right.
What's next that makes you a Christian? And in a certain sense, what makes you a Christian is that you don't live by your taste about, yes, this makes me more cultivated, this is kind of vulgar. That's a good thing. But you understand yourself to live under judgment. And that's what Jesus gives you. Jesus is a judge. When St. Paul in Acts is reported to have gone to Athens, and he gives a sermon on the Areopagus, the hill of Ares. And he famously starts out by saying, I've been looking around at all your shrines. You guys must be the most religious people there are. That word religious also means superstitious there. And I noticed you had a shrine to the unknown God. Well, I'm here to tell you about that unknown God. And he goes through, it's really a natural theology about the created order of the universe and how that makes us think of a God. But when he ends it, he says, but the one thing you don't have is Jesus Christ as our judge. And now we get into a point that can be developed phenomenologically through our experience of conscience. And that's where Newman went. That the thing about being a gentleman who's governed by taste, including intellectual taste, that you never quite get is conscience as something that you experience as from the outside. It's not just that I have made myself a polished man. It's that I confess myself as a fallen man.
Right.
And I think that's part of what the offer is that Christianity has in a very specific form. Now, I don't say that other religions don't have similar things. I think they do. But that's one of the paths in to feeling like this is going to, in the end, this is going to be religious. There's something that really sets up as religious about this.
Let me ask a final question here, and then, we never left love, right?
But
I want to tie it back more directly, but here's my final question, which is, you said it's not going to be something evidential or even phenomenological that's going to break this equipoise for me. It's going to be an act of love where I can't help but be devoted to one way or the other. And my only question for you, again, because equipoise is not just on the level of argument, it can be on the level of sense perception, it could be, or even in love.
Yes.
And so when you look at the great theologians of Islam, Judaism, let's say Hinduism, Buddhism, and you see their love for their religion, why does that not cause a kind of despair of it prompts the further question of, well, then is my love legitimate, or how do we know this love is legitimate? If everyone is reporting earnestly that I feel a great love for my religion, how do you then navigate that?
Yes. It's interesting to think of the case of love for a person, both in ways it's similar and ways it's different here. That when you break up with somebody and you feel distraught, they tell you there are a lot of fish in the sea.
Right.
That's the strategy of equipoise.
Interesting. Right.
But the reason they say that to you is not really that they think there are a lot of indifferent fish in the sea. They think you'll find your fish if you go out and fish some more, right? So it sounds like they're recommending equipoise. There are a lot of fish in the sea.
Right.
Then that's in there as comfort, but as actual provocation, it's to tell you to get out there and fish.
Right. It becomes from type to one.
Yes.
Right? Like the type view of relationships is, well, I like blondes who are above 5'8", right?
Yes.
But when you're actually dating a blonde over 5'8", you don't think that. You think, I like
it's
this
one.
blonde.
Yes.
Right.
And you don't think that because there's a list of attributes. It's that person. It's not some set of attributes. So in the case of choosing a religion, if we have to use that language, of letting a religion come to have an authoritative draw on you, I think that there are a lot of fish in that sea as well, and they're really good fish.
Yeah.
And now the question is, will you feel like you've just netted one at random if you pop for one rather than another? And I think that the question is as superficially convincing about choosing a lover as it is about choosing a religion. But I think in the case of choosing a lover, we see that it's superficial. There's something superficial about it.
It's obviously,
yes.
right.
That, people write constantly about how one of the main problems about people falling in love now is that with dating apps, there are too many fish in your sea, so you won't commit. I'm actually pretty skeptical that that's a fundamental thing. The issue about religions, that's more interesting to me, about whether we're disarmed or call it unmanned in our power of choice. Exactly because of the avalanche of cultural knowledge that we have. And this is a Nietzschean point. Right. That
the surplus of culture is suffocating us, right?
Yes. It makes it impossible. It's the abuse of history, right? It falls upon us and disables choice for us. I take that seriously as something that happens to scholars. This is why most people who are in religious studies departments are some sort of atheist or agnostic.
Right.
Religious
it is the
studies.
equipoise. It
yes,
is the equipoise.
It is.
Wow.
Religious studies was invented for people who are besotted by religion, but who aren't in a particular religion.
Right.
They don't have a commitment to a particular religion.
Right.
And so they love it all.
Yeah.
Is that the way to make a great intellectual department? Or would it be better to do what Notre Dame did? Have a Catholic theology department. That's what we're doing. We also have scholars. We have Jewish scholars who are deeply committed to being Jews.
Right. Well, I feel like you've deepened the problematic for me, but I still don't think it's satisfying in the following sense, which, as you suggested, there are structural differences between choosing a lover and choosing a religion. I mean, the structural similarity is that before you choose, it's a type, whereas after you commit, from the inside, right, everything kind of makes sense and is coherent.
Yes.
But the difference,
and you'll even laugh a little bit at the type stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. In the same way you do in romantic relationships.
Yes.
But the obvious difference is, if these religions are to be taken on face value, the success function is very, very different between the two, right? If I choose, you know, the 10th best woman for me in the world versus the first.
You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
If I choose the second best, the second most accurate religion, well, oftentimes I'm probably going to go to hell. There's so many, assumptions there, but I think
that's point 998 of the 1,000.
Yeah,
right. Yes.
And so that's why, like, I don't sit around, frankly, with the women problem and being like, the equipoise doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
And so, that's what making this, your suggestion of love, of transplanting the erotic sphere onto the religious sphere, not fully satisfying for me.
Yeah. So I suppose it's not going to help you to read Pascal either. Right?
I'll try.
His famous wager.
Yeah.
Right. Look, I am not content with the language that is kind of in the background of some of what you said about making the leap, right? That's a very Kierkegaardian leap of faith kind of thing. That's really not how Newman thought of it, because he didn't have that fideist moment in him that at some point, you just decide to have faith. Whatever, decide to have faith sounds a little funny.
Right.
Ultimately, I think Newman's counsel is you have to give up your aspiration to overcome all your doubts. In the end, we're called to live a life, and we can't live a life that's disabled by our doubts. Our doubts are just a part of living.
Right.
Socrates is famous for philosophy as a way of life, kind of Pierre Hadot kind of things. But where's the place in Plato's dialogues where we see Socrates really overcoming all our doubts?
Right.
There aren't any. He provokes us to live better, but he doesn't show us how to live without doubt.
Right. In other words, this is not to say don't investigate the different religions.
Not at all.
Don't compare the first experience, but don't maintain the illusion that you're going to break the equipoise in a way that sexless would be happy with.
That's what I would say. No,
see.
in the end, I think Newman's picture is very chastening to a certain kind of philosophical aspiration. And that aspiration, I mean, we wouldn't have become pros at this unless we identified with that aspiration. And so it's a good thing, but it's not the only thing.
Right. And perhaps we're back to the relinquishing the masculinity of philosophy thing.
I think
right?
so.
Yeah. Okay, let's take the conversation back to your proposal of marriage, because I want to give you another kind of critique, right?
Okay.
Which is, I wonder if, not for the average, let's say for the average person, let's say this is totally fine, but for the great man, one who has great aspirations, whether wife and children may not be a good idea. And I can think of two philosophers who've argued as such, or can be interpreted as such. Why not have a wife, a romantic partner? Rousseau argues the desire for recognition comes in many species, one of which is to be the best. And Rousseau thought marriage was a great way to satisfy this desire for recognition, because we can't all be the best at, for everyone, right? We can't all be the best basketball player, but with marriage, we can be the best for someone. However, if you take the negative of that argument, it's that if you don't have a romantic partner who gives you that kind of recognition, you yourself are more motivated to win it in different domains. And I see this amongst the great entrepreneurs that I built tech companies for a while, that once they are in a satisfied romantic relationship, some of their motivations kind of transform, and some of their more agonistic motivations also are reduced. And the argument against having children would be Nietzsche in his, I think it's the third essay, Aesthetic Ideal, about essentially why great philosophers don't get married. And it's because great philosophers win their immortality through their books. And so by having children...
He got that from the symposium.
Of course, yes. And so my challenge to you is, I think there's a reason that the Buddha had to abandon his family, that Jesus didn't have a family to begin with, that the great entrepreneurs like Elon and Steve Jobs have terrible private lives, and a lot of the great philosophers, most of them aren't married. Is there something to be said there?
Yeah, I think there is something to be said there. The life is full of choices, and nobody stated this with greater punchiness than Jesus himself. So after Jesus says, look, Moses gave you a law allowing divorce because of the hardness of your hearts. But I say, no, marriage is not something you can dissolve.
Right.
And his disciples, like his boys, right? They're like talking to each other saying, did you hear what he said? Like, you can't get rid of her no matter what. Given that, it's better not to get married at all. And Jesus hears them say that. He says, you know what? That's right. It's right that for some people, it's better not to get married at all. And there are some people who make themselves a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven.
An even more rigorous ideal.
Even more. And I think there's a secular form of that too. Right. I think it is true that for certain kinds of lives, you will not be able to be a good father or a good mother. And you may not even be able to be a good spouse, although that's a bit more controllable.
Why?
Children are much less controllable about your time commitment, about your focus. One of the great things about the academic life is it takes a lot of time, but your time is pretty flexible compared to a great entrepreneurial life, for example.
Yeah. You're a general, basically.
Yes. Right. So that means that the academic life is actually more open to married life than as I would conceive of it.
The man of action versus the man of contemplation.
Yes, I think so. Let alone the woman of those things.
Right.
So I think that the challenge to marriage that you state is a true challenge. I think there are lives that make marriage very difficult. Now, I don't want to make that an abstract general theory about greatness, because I would want to scrutinize, okay, what's this form of greatness you're talking about? What's it actually take?
Right.
Because there's a lot of excuse making for having been a bad husband or father.
Right.
Well, yeah, I was at the office all the time. Did you do anything at the office all the time?
Right.
It's an open question sometimes. So I don't want to give the game away, but I want to concede the point, because I think Jesus Christ himself conceded the point. Now, he was talking about
priestly devotion, right?
Yes, about giving up marriage for the kingdom of heaven. But the next thing that happens right after that is Jesus is resting, and some of the disciples are hanging around, and people are bringing their little kids to Jesus to bless. And they're like shooing away the little kids, saying, hey, the master is resting. He doesn't have time for these children. And Jesus says, bring the children. If you don't become like children, you'll never get to heaven. So the writing in that passage is really interesting. There's both the call to accept, you might be called to a sacrifice of family life altogether for the kingdom of God, but don't think that these children are distractions from the kingdom of God. They're also embodiments of it. So does it make sense to say that for certain kinds of great souledness, of magnanimity,
right,
of having a
singular
big life force,
right, a singular focus, right,
that will be inconsistent with married life? It does make sense.
Right.
And you can't have everything in a human life. And so you'll be sacrificing a great good. Will you be accomplishing a greater good?
Right. That's the question.
That's the question. And with supernatural resources, you can make sense out of it as a greater good. Right. Can you make sense out of it just with natural resources?
Secular resources.
I think you can.
Right.
I think you can.
Yeah, like a great artist. Or,
yes. And I would not criticize a man or a woman as having been somehow selfish for foregoing having a family in order to have a company.
Yeah, I see.
I wouldn't say that at the human level that they're stunted or something like that. I do think that they probably won't have certain resources of moral growth that family life gives one.
Yeah.
Living before witnesses all the time, which is what happens when you get married and then when you have children.
Yeah.
That will make you a better man.
Right. In fact, you said that the single greatest maturation force for a man
Yeah.
tends to be living up to your woman's kind of ideal or
Yes.
expectations of you. So, but yeah, why is that? Why is that?
I'm drawing on Plato's Phaedrus, so the other great erotic dialogue, and we've both profited a lot from René Girard too. So this has a little bit of Girard in it as well. The notion that someone who's loved gets reflected back to him or her the view that the person who loves you has of you. And Plato has a beautiful image of it, that you see yourself reflected in the lover's
mirror,
eyes.
right, as a mirror.
And but it's an idealizing mirror. And one of the things that happens is you think, I don't think I'm really quite as good as she thinks I am. And so you try to live up to it. And it makes you a better man. And when you're with your children, a man who has daughters is going to realize that everything he says to his wife is teaching his daughters how a man who loves them should talk to them. And if you belittle your wife, you're teaching your daughters to accept being belittled. And the first time you hear that creeping into your tone of voice, and you're living before witnesses, that will help you become a better man. And if you have sons, you're teaching them how to talk to women all the time, every day. You'll be a better person. So, or at least the energies are there, the social energies are there that are supportive of moral development.
Potential is there.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes. And so I think that for the vast majority of adult men and women, it's that intimate context of marriage, especially with child rearing, that will make them better morally themselves, in part because they need to be exemplars.
Right, I see.
They're not just teachers by precept.
Right.
They're teachers by example.
Let's talk about the proper role of what many people conceive to be the lower things in love. That's physical beauty, physical attraction, and sex itself. What do you think is the right role of that in one's love life?
I think enjoyable sexual relations between spouses, I think, are a mutual celebration of love and a mutual recognition. To be visible to your lover as an attractive sexual partner,
right,
that's a very fulfilling part.
Right, with OnlyFans girls were lacking, right?
Yes, yeah. So those are all very good things. Because sex is never just sex. It's never just bodily. It's animate. That is, it's body and soul.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a quote from your book. This is you commenting on a literary character. He now feels he has never made love with anyone. All he has done is fuck people. And he is angry with himself for living this way. What is the difference between these two modes of having sex?
Yeah, here I'm pushing hard on the notion that marriage is really the only fully honest context for conjugal relations. It's the only one that's fully honest because it's the only one where the physical acts, the pleasure-giving acts, say, I love you, with the fullness of the vows. I think that sexual intercourse, to use that terrible term, the aphrodisiac action, I think it's meaningful in the same way that our words are meaningful. And with the same depth, not just of every word when we say, I love you, those mean something too, but of what it means when you stand before the altar and say the words of the vow that are the public affirmation of a lifelong love. And in the Catholic tradition, the marriage sacrament is not complete just with the public vows. It's
Right.
only completed with the act of sexual consummation, which is the private part of the vow, right?
Right.
So the
Well, do you think? Let me ask you this: do you think that you could defend that in a purely natural, secular context as well? Like
yes,
that lifelong monogamous marriage is the only valid kind of expression of love. Yeah.
I think that what a couple wants from each other when they pursue marriage, and particularly when they complete the physical expression of that in a way that's open to children, I think it does point toward permanency,
Even on naturalistic grounds.
even at a natural level, because of what children are. Now, some people, I suppose, would push back on that and say, "Well, no.
After they're 20, and
What
they're
if
grown,
what
right?
if when the children are gone? What way would you see your wife, your husband, thinking that when we're roughly 50-ish, now we get to decide again?" And I don't think I've made that persuasive in this instant, but I think lingering over the story we have to tell about what our relationship has been, if we
Right.
think it's
You have to renegotiate later
yes,
on, right? I see.
I think a lot of people would feel the pressure of that.
Right, I see. So, despite you saying that sex and physical attraction and beauty can be this very elevating thing in the right context, I do find it very curious that both in Plato, as well as in the Catholic tradition, non-procreative sex is still not allowed, even in legitimate marriages, right? In Plato, the highest kind of lovers only has sex for children, like Socrates.
Yes.
The middling lovers are the ones who occasionally indulge just for sex and pleasure.
Yeah.
And of course, in the 20th century, famously, the Catholic Church banned contraception, right? So if sex can be this beautiful thing, that increases intimacy as a lifelong commitment. I love you and I'm here for you. Why does it need also to be procreative in order for it to be legitimate?
Yeah, to close a particular act of marital union, of sexual union, to procreation is a withholding of something that was pledged to each other, even if both parties are accepting of that withholding.
Right. And even if there's children already, and yeah.
Yes. So that is it intrinsic to the very meaning of the sexual marital act that it accept the possibility of children? Now, the Catholic Church has never insisted any maximizing tendency about sexual intercourse. But the idea was, and still is, that the specific love that's marital sees children as the completion of that love.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean you have to try to have as many children as you can, but it does mean when you repeat the sexual act, it's a constant re-celebration of the very words of the vows, of that open giving to each other.
Right.
So to, so to speak, protect the meaning of every act of marital intercourse requires every act of marital intercourse to bear the full weight of what that commitment is and to celebrate it.
Yeah, but then the issue is, I believe the resolution, so to speak, is like natural family planning,
Yes.
and the advice is, well, if you don't want children, you still want intimacy and sex, just have sex in the infertile periods of the menstrual window.
Yes.
But there, I don't see how that's functionally any different from contraception, right?
Of course, it would be possible for a couple to avoid sexual intercourse during a woman's fertile periods uh, in a way that was reserving themselves from each other.
Right, that's withholding.
Yes. That's a theoretical possibility, but it's not much of a practical threat. Uh, most couples who, for some period of time, avoid intercourse during a woman's most fertile periods, they don't see that as an indefinite or a permanent avoidance. They still want to have children together.
Right.
So that their acts of marital intercourse outside the fertile period still express that sense of relationship to each other.
Right.
So to avoid an act of intercourse during the fertile time seems to me quite a different thing from taking some technological intervention, or it doesn't have to be terribly technological.
Right.
Condoms aren't very fancy machines, after
Right.
all. To actually change the act of lovemaking itself.
Right.
Those seem to me to be two different things.
I see.
Now, I can see why somebody might say, you know, even if I accept that they're two rather different things, one is just not celebrating your marital vows sexually during that time, and the other is celebrating it but saying, well, not really this time. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think those, I came to be convinced that the church's teaching was right to say, no, it's each and every act. It's not just the marriage as a whole. This was a big debate back in the 60s, actually.
I see. And this is not one of the infallible ones, ex cathedra. So this is not one of the dogmatic claims.
No, but then there are very few claims that have been made with that particular
degree
formal
I see.
statement. But it's a very, very old teaching. It didn't. I mean, it goes way back. It's like more or less co-equal with the Christian communities. It's true that it became a much more fraught issue, really in 1930 when the Anglicans at the Lambeth Conference, which was their annual big conference, when they came out with this very, very limited statement about using contraception within marriage. And the Catholics immediately responded by saying, no, that's not right. And that was very strongly embraced by lay Catholics as a sense of Catholic identity.
Right.
It was only around late 50s when everybody knew the pill was coming that things got a little trickier.
Right.
So, I mean, I understand why this can be difficult for couples. It is. It's sacrificial.
Right.
It's sacrificial.
Right.
But, geez, the church never said nothing was sacrificial.
Yeah, right.
Certainly not about sex.
Right. The Platonic concern against sex seems a lot more deep than a Catholic, in the sense that I'm pretty sure Plato wouldn't even be okay with natural family planning, because it's not just the telos of sex that is important for Plato, but it's also the act of sexual pleasure itself that can inflame the appetite and take away from contemplation. Right. So the tension between the good life and and one's sex life is a lot greater in Plato than it is in the
Yes,
Catholics.
it certainly tends to be. And, most of these passages, Plato is thinking not so much about marriage between a man and a woman. He's really thinking about pederasty.
Right.
Yeah, so that it's always tricky to know how much to generalize something that seems so socially specific in a particular thinker.
Right. I see.
And I think that many of Plato's attitudes to sexual pleasure as something that can become animalistic, it can nail us to the body, to use language from the Phaedo. Sometimes that language strikes me as more therapeutic than it is analytic.
It's trying to shock you in the right direction, even if it goes a bit too far. Or something like that, right?
Yes. I can't think of a passage where Plato talks about what in Catholic lingo would be the unitive effect of sexual pleasure between two lovers.
In the laws, I think he mentions that as a consequence in the laws, I believe.
Because he's really thinking about marriage there.
Yeah, right.
But it's not a very extended reflection.
No, it's one, two lines.
Yeah. So, and married couples surely have known about it for a very long time, right?
Right.
Plato is not, in that direct way, much of a resource, I'd say, for thinking about this.
Right.
And I think many texts, and even in the Christian tradition, they still have a lot of this scaring you away from sex aspect.
Right. That's therapy rather than philosophy.
Yeah. And I don't want to make that distinction between therapy and philosophy too strong, because philosophy has therapeutic desires as well.
Right.
But I think sometimes we have to do some of our own work on this. The tasks of philosophy are not over.
Yeah. And so let me ask you this. In Plato,
Yeah.
love is so powerful that even though it's not necessary, but it's sufficient if you know how to follow it to take you all the way, right? Erotic love. Do you think erotic love has the same centrality in the Christian tradition? It clearly can improve you in these ways that we described, but does it have that kind of strong power? Yeah, because there's other forms of like God's love for us, like agape, right?
Yes.
That may have that, but erotic love itself.
I think it doesn't have, erotic love as such, doesn't have the centrality that it has for Plato. I think lots of people in the Christian tradition tried to use those Platonic dialogues, often filtered through later thinkers like Plotinus, they wanted the energies that Plato's eroticism gives to you. But that doesn't dominate the tradition, I would say. Partly because you've got other models. For example, the model of the Good Samaritan with his open charity. There's nothing eroticized in that model. Or another great model from the New Testament would be the story of the prodigal son. And the way the prodigal son, he has his whole speech about, Father, I've been terrible. You don't have to treat me like your son anymore. I'll just work for you. Before he can get a word out, his father runs and embraces him, right? That's a model of love. Those models are not eroticized at all. And so, but Plato's so powerful within Greek culture that when Christianity emerges, it emerges in a thoroughly Hellenized culture. And so you can't get away from Platonism. And as soon as Christianity starts to develop itself intellectually, it develops itself as a Platonism. So that strand has always run through Christianity,
Right.
but it's had lots of other resources as well. So it's not as central.
I see. You mentioned you mentioned that lifelong monogamy can be defended, you think, even within the naturalistic context. But to say that, the ideal outcome of marriage is beautiful children and a lifelong commitment, and it would be weird to renegotiate at 50, that doesn't seem to rule out that if it gets bad enough, right,
Yeah.
that divorce is still an option. So I'd like to ask you about that. But also, I'm just curious
Yeah.
because in the Old Testament, monogamy is not the only the only sort of
No, the patriarchs have many wives.
yeah,
They
and
have
so
harems.
exactly, and so what about Jesus' coming? You can see why, like the Beatitudes and how he reconceives of the laws into his own virtues. But why was this aspect of marriage reconceived by Jesus as well? Those would be my questions.
Yeah, insofar as there's a scriptural answer, and of course a scriptural answer is always too narrow, right? It's never just that. These things aren't just little proof texts, but uh, it is so direct and explicit in the New Testament that when Jesus was asked explicitly about divorce, he explicitly said no to it and gave the explanation of why, and this is very unusual in the New Testament, that he actually contradicted a law of Moses.
Yeah, exactly.
Very unusual. And he said, Moses gave you that for your hardness of heart, but I tell you no. And that deserves a lot of reflection about how divorce is a part of hardness of heart, of a kind of, again, a mutual withholding that we both kind of implicitly have in the contract. You can get out. And what a challenge it is in the New Testament. And it's been a challenge below these 2,000 years.
Right. The Anglican Church was formed because of it. Yeah.
And it's always been couched around with, well, yeah, but are there certain conditions on whether the vows really, did you really mean them, right? Things like that. For me, I've decided that it is so authoritative and so specific.
Right, so definitive and clear, right.
It's made me look at my hardness of heart. That's where I've taken that.
I see.
That's what I feel I had to do. And I'm not willing, I wasn't willing to make myself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
So I had to scrutinize my hardness of heart. And believe me, I haven't overcome it. But I try to be always aware of it.
What about the change from the Old Testament, multiple wives? So why do you think that occurred?
Well, look, there are a number of different ways in which polygamy is closer to the Catholic ideal than contracepted monogamy is. Right? Polygamy is, as a cultural formation, is based on the high value of procreativity. Now, it also depends on a subordination of women and of their moral agency within the marital relationship. And that's where the hardness of heart was.
I see. So these two suggestions, no divorce and monogamy, you read them as similar, as pointing to the hardness of heart of the Old Testament.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And this gets more theological and scriptural than directly philosophical. But then now the whole question of the way in which Christ completes the old law rather than destroying it or replacing it, this is really worth thinking about on some of these questions.
I see.
We're shown that the disciples were astonished by it. They were very challenged by it. and we're still challenged by it.
Right, I see. Let me ask the last set of practical questions, I
Yeah.
think, for our audience, which is you've made love, or you've done your best to try to rescue love in this conversation
Yes.
and through your work. Um, what do you have to say practically to young people who it sounds like you've mentored quite a few about what to look for in love? And this is made especially difficult because of what you said about love as a potentiality
Yeah.
that has not been actualized. So we're not choosing the final person that we're gonna go with. We're evaluating people's potential. What do you think are the most important things to look for?
I think to marry well, you have to come to have confidence that this person thinks marriage is for life.
That's the primary thing.
That's the primary thing, because so much follows from that, Jonathan. So much follows from that. If you think that your spouse is someone with whom your entire sexual being, body and soul, would be dependent, then you will treat that person in a way that makes them always want to make love with you. That is not instrumental. That is powerfully formative. You know, the traditional vows to love, honor, and obey. We kind of don't like the obey one. Instead of getting it away from the women, I think we should have put it in for the men too, because we're mutually obedient. But love, while it's complicated, is kind of is easy. Honor is the one that I think really focuses the mind. What does it mean to live with another person in the intimacy of everyday life and always to honor them? Because all the regular irritations of everyday life, all of the moments when you hear words almost come out of your mouth that might be kind of half true, but that are not the thing to say to somebody you're honoring. I mean, learning to bite your tongue is an absolute virtue for a spouse. And gradually, you'll never get done. Gradually, though, you'll start to bite the tongue of your mind too. And you'll stop to think those things as well as not saying them.
I see.
But start with not saying them,
Yeah.
and be willing to be there for 50 or so years.
Yeah.
That how do you know, even about yourself, that that's a true aspiration for
Yeah.
you?
Right.
And that's the thing. It can't be a true aspiration. It's just an individual thing. It only becomes true as a couple. When you marry, there's a new thing in the world. That couple's a new thing in the world. And you have to be devoted to that thing.
Right.
And so if I had one practical piece of advice, it's to linger over the question of honoring each other.
Right.
Continue to honor each other through thick and thin, through agreement and disagreement. Always preserve each other's honor.
Right. And if you successfully do that, the best case scenario, I imagine you would say love itself is sustainable, but the character of it changes, surely, right?
Yes.
From the initial infatuation to a deeper
Sure.
sort of, yeah.
Yeah. But that continues to empower that special energy that you get from somebody finding you sexually attractive. That is a special energy. And there's no reason that married couples should let that fall into abeyance.
Right.
Yeah,
But surely at a certain age, you just don't expect that to be there, right? Or
I don't know that Yeah, people will have all sorts of physical developments over time that might make them uh, seek sex less or have sex less often. But there's also an old tradition about the notion of conjugal duty. Uh, we make fun of that now, but there's a deep fact about that one of your duties as a spouse is to continue, insofar as you're able, to be a sexual partner of your spouse.
Right.
That's a real thing. That's a part of what being married is. So uh, it's true, I suppose, for every couple, if they both live long enough, they may reach an age when their bodies simply don't allow them to be sexual partners. But even then, the the memory of the particular form of honor that
Right.
someone has done to you by being your
Sustains.
sexual partner,
Sustained,
that's
right.
still
Right.
a deep part of your love.
And so you've mentored a lot of quite intellectually
Hmm.
gifted and inclined
Hmm.
people throughout this process, I imagine. Do you think finding someone who can resonate with you on that level is important?
How important is that? You know, it's not important as such. I mean, your spouse might read your books, but don't ask. There's one thing about people with whom you have your best intellectual conversations.
Right.
It's a different thing about having a habitual thoughtfulness of conversation. I think that's important for spouses.
Like a deep ability to talk about values.
Yes.
Right.
And the truth is that people who, frankly, they wouldn't be interesting to me to talk to as intellectuals might still be deeply thoughtful people and are interesting to talk to about thoughtful things in human life.
Right.
The uh, I think most people who are more like us, the spouse material they're likely to meet is also highly intellectual and enjoys intellectuality as such. But I don't think that that's actually a very
Necessary.
deep part in most marriages, even of two people who themselves are very talented intellectuals.
Right. Interesting.
I think
Right.
thoughtfulness, that's another thing. But that kind of thoughtfulness is closer to practical thoughtfulness than theoretical
Right.
thoughtfulness.
It's almost more like the honor, the
I
honoring,
think it's
right?
in
Yeah,
there.
deep insensitivity.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Professor, for a fascinating interview.
Hey, it was a pleasure talking with you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then go join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. Now, if you like this interview, I suggest you go check out my lecture on the Symposium, which explains Plato's theory of love that we reference in this interview with David O'Connor. You can find links to that lecture and everything else we discussed in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.